and welcome to Poetry Worth Hearing, a monthly poetry podcast magazine, hosted by me, Kathleen McPhilemy, and with music by Alex Heen. In this first episode, you will hear poets reading their own work, as well as extracts from Zoom open mic readings by David Cooke and Lynne Wycherley. There'll also be an interview with Pat Winslow, who is talking about poets she thinks are worth reading. Of course, the aural qualities of a poem are only one aspect of its totality. Many of the poems in this episode have very strong visual characteristics. Indeed, some are accompanied by paintings or photographs. And a poem of any complexity needs to be heard more than once, and read, and reread. So, if you want to see the poems you have heard, you can go to poetryworthhearing.biz, where you will find the texts of the poems, as well as information about the poets and their publications. The first two poems you will hear are notable for their visual appearance, as well as how they sound. We start with Lucy Ingram's and Wind Whip.
Wind Whip. Along the wood's wandering edge, not flowers, scrub, wired with stalks and thorn, husked with last year's leaf. No new leaf either. Instead, a tender tenderness of catkins wagging from a hazel's wands. And now this saffron strobe, a siskin, tangled in them, mingling golds. Tilloo, tilloo, ti. The bird's sprung song unstarts. A woken wind is up behind Bean Hill. Sows, seethes, motorcades down the rides. Bellows every web and twig, twists, tugs, thugs, shakes still. Dragged in the silences it drags our winter's bets back on. From the ponds, stung, the raised cries of geese, like wheels.
Lucy has won a number of important poetry competitions, and her first pamphlet, Lightfall, was published in 2019 by Flairstack Books. Our next poet, Sarah Bryson, has had her poems published widely in magazines and has organised and run numerous poetry workshops. Here is her poem, Instructions for Naturalisation.
Now is the time to bury them at 3 or 4 times their own depth where possible, working in the warmth of a long-shadowed late September day. Place their dry, papery points upwards and ease their matted bases into the musty earth. Remember to space them, informally, in random, odd-numbered clusters, under the chestnut and in the orchard where the blackbird scuttles around rotting apples. Then tread back the turfs, gently.
We continue with the theme of the natural world in our next poem, by Richard Lister. Richard's poetry has been described as a celebration of ordinary magic, perceived by a keen eye. Here is his poem.
Blink. An image in the eye of a swift, slipped past her cornea's curve, funneled from the light of a burnt orange land. The colour emerges from a dark-room sink, brazened with heat. She drifts 10,000 feet high, so stark and strike of cliffs are smoothed to ruffles of frayed cloth. Desert, left waste, forsaken as she migrates, yet lifts to her mind with a blink.
The next two poems are by Pat Winslow, as she also turns her eye on the natural world.
One small step. The moon that climbs over the campsite is sticky as marmalade. The 5 sitting round their fire rise as one to stare at it. They are backlit, wearing onesies, creatures standing upright for the first time, antlered, fuzzy-eared, furry little bumps for tails, transfixed, not yet aware. A minute, maybe less, it seems to take forever. One by one they sit, resume their conversation. It's as if the miracle of being here, and the moon's being there, and the persistence of the tide had nothing to do with any of it. Scarlet Pimpernel. In a field of tents and cars where the eye is drawn to shock-headed dandelions and fluorescent frisbees, it takes fine-tuning to find one amongst plantain and clover. Easy after that to pinpoint others, as if a wavelength had been discovered or a humming wire that runs beneath them. Such a tiny, pointed bud tucked under a leaf, the shade of lipstick at its tip, 1960s coral pink, which is more orange than its name suggests. In its prime, 5 stamens, each capped sulphur gold, stand tight and firm inside their neighbouring petals. Indivisible morning star, it is itself, intimate, complete.
Last year, when the pandemic started and we had lockdown, many poetry groups and workshops disappeared and then resurfaced as Zoom meetings. This was true for the group I belong to, Oxford Stanza 2. And out of those Zoom meetings evolved a second monthly event, which was Zoom Open Mic. And this episode will include some clips from those readings. Here we have David Cooke, a fine poet and a stalwart of the poetry world, well known for his editorship of the online magazine, The High Window. In this clip, you can hear him reading from his own work. Details of his publications can be found on poetryworthhearing.biz.
The first poem I'm going to read is called The Dresser. This poem actually started off as a half-baked attempt to translate a poem. I wanted to translate a poem by Rimbaud called Le Buffet, which is about a sideboard, and I very quickly got bored of this. And then I suddenly remembered my grandparents' dresser in their central room of their little cottage in the west of Ireland. And then I decided to stop wasting my time with somebody else's bit of furniture, but to write a poem about a bit of furniture that I actually had some kind of real connection with. So this is basically about the bit of furniture, but it's also about the way that there was a lot of migration from the west of Ireland, obviously my own parents and many of their siblings. So this poem is called The Dresser. The shrine and archive of those who had gone, the dresser loomed imposingly, hogging its space. Their one attempt at opulence in a room that was otherwise Spartan. Ranged above it, in a gap left beneath the ceiling, there were portraits of couples who had tied the knot elsewhere. Brides and grooms in cheap suits they'd wear again on Sundays. Pushed to the back of a shelf, half hidden behind unsorted papers, and the pots for pins and pens, a girl in a white dress, her image silver framed, clutched her missal in a gloved hand, staring back awkwardly through jumble. A repository for anything, too highfalutin for everyday use, it housed the china they laid out for guests, the loaded Yanks who were distant cousins trying to find their roots, or English kids whose accents wavered between two places, their mums and dads who were sons and daughters. Stashed away alongside the cutlery, the lace, and a stiff folded tablecloth, there were biscuit tins that bulged with photos, in which the poses always seemed the same. My mum was a great reader, and she was a member of Foyle's book club, if any of you are old enough to remember that. And she had this anomalous set of books in her library, a 5-volume set called The Lives of the Saints by a man called Butler, Father Butler. And it was, tales of martyrdom and great virtue and all that kind of stuff. So at a certain point, when I thought I was beyond kids' books, I started looking at my mum's library to see what she had on offer. And this is a poem I wrote about it many, many years later. God alone knows why our mum had bought them. A set of 5 thumping tomes with green boards and gilt titles. The cross embossed on each was emblematic of a better place, while she seemed happy enough with this one. In her small bookcase, they were dusty slabs, laid flat on the bottom shelf. Never read or even opened on a rainy day, they were crowded out by flimsier stuff. Time and the hour, these lovers fled away. So when I was after a grown-up book, this is where I started. The Dark Secret of Josephine, Cousin Kate, Venetia. Their covers mainly soppy, carriages and bonnets, too much flirting spoiled the plots. No lovers' games distracted Butler's saints, who knelt down and prayed serenely on rank and clotted sand, or otherwise bided their time, single-mindedly focused on healing afflictions, saying their prayers. Fulgentius, shining one, Chrysostom, the golden-mouthed, were not the names of souls who yielded, accepting the final cut. Eulalia's neck was like a fountain, from which, unabashed, a white dove fluttered. Right, I'll finish off with a poem called Man on a Wire. And it's a poem about a Frenchman who in the 1980s slung a high wire between the Twin Towers in Manhattan. This was in the 80s before 9/11, when obviously they got destroyed. And then he proceeded to do an illegal high wire walk across these wires. And when I read this at a poetry group that I used to attend, one of the people in the group said, "Do you realize that whole poem is one sentence?" And I hadn't had a clue that it was, but I was quite pleased when he pointed this out, because I suppose the poem is kind of taking one step until he finally gets to the other side. So this is Man on a Wire. When he looks back on his life, he will see that the best of it was a journey he took from A to B on a wire between two buildings. His every breath a distillation of what it meant to keep your nerve and hold steady. each muscle braced and quivering like the wire itself, which, at a distance, was no more than a filament, but close up was a hawser, along which he took illicit steps, knowing his future weighed upon them, and all things were simple once the choice was made. However the pole teetered, or the air roared wildly above a world of chairs and carpets, dates and deliveries, or the cops who stared amazed at a man walking across the sky, whom later they cuffed and cautioned apologetically, before asking him politely his name and a few relevant details. Thank you very much.
And now back to our new poems. The next poem is by Vanessa Lampert.
Sissinghurst. This is where June is, tumultuous summer, staunchly upright to the sky's blunt rule, blooms uplifted, palms raised like a child explaining how a plant is, assured ancestry of flowers, being oblivious to all calamity, assembled in their currencies of colour, blue with bluer still, silver exalting the white. We wander the avenues of pleached limes. You tell me trees this close will meld their limbs together. We reach to part the foliage, touching hands, searching for the invisible or the scar. This place teems with the elderly in pairs. Cheerfully they background vantages in visors and drip-dry slacks, who on earth will be left to love us when we're them.
Vanessa has won many prizes for her poems and is also a founder-editor of the magazine The Alchemy Spoon. Jane Thomas shares with Vanessa an awareness of human relationships and frailties that is both sharp and tender. Here are her 3 poems.
Unfortunately, due to budget constraints within the NHS, increasingly medics and frontline caregivers are having to rely on Google Translate to get their messages across to patients. Unfortunately, Google Translate does not have a very high accuracy rate for medical terms, and this is the idea that I was trying to get across in my poem, Comfort Always. I start with the phrases that come from Google Translate, and then the second part of the poem, I outline the intended communication from the caregiver. Comfort Always, via Google Translate. Your husband cannot fall over, but he needs to be aired. His heart was imprisoned. Was your home temperature high? He is now ready to donate. Your child is sleeping early, but her state is not life-stopping. Your other child is dead. Your husband is stable, but he needs to be ventilated. He has had a cardiac arrest. Did he have a high fever at home? He has the opportunity to donate his organs. Your child will be born prematurely, but her condition is not life-threatening. Your other child is fitting. The coracle. Like a mudlark at the edge of the Lethe, I cast post-it notes and pills into the surge, knotting a short rope and a light life ring to shore. I want to moor you against the burbles and drift, calm the falls of your choppy syntax, stop the vowels tumbling into a spray of words. You fish for basics, chumming for the who, what, when and where of life from your single outrigger, laying night lines along familiar faces and day poles for trout, turning taff, towie and teffy over and over with your paddle. Your hours slow like pondweed, amnesic to your reflection. You sit, cradled by lichen and willow, in your bulrush boat for one. Going away outfit. I drop off your clothes in a bag for life, washed, shaken and pressed. Your favourite green jumper, check shirt, neat mole-coloured cords, and a pair of pure new wool socks. You can't bear cold feet. When I arrive the next morning to say goodbye, there is a loose thread on your jumper. As I lean down to kiss you one last time, I pull it, unsure whether it will draw me closer or unravel.
Ironically, lockdown and Zoom have in some ways led to more cooperation between Oxford Stanza 2 poets and their colleagues in Bonn, Germany. Our next poem comes from Eva Val, who is a poet and visual artist. Although she's giving us the English version here, you can find both English and German on the website.
March. I'm walking with trees, my feet entangled in foliage, cracking through early morning dew. I'm talking in tree tongues, my fountain wide open. I shout and laugh while white blossom clouds float and sink. Haze above my landing place, which is my bed. But I'm outside in the snowdrop bath. Stark naked I crawl into my delicate tree, brocade my dress and home, the sky blue silk, snow belts tickle toes. I am walking in trees. Where to? Where to? Where to?
And now we have an interview with Pat Winslow, where she tells me about some of the poets she thinks are worth reading.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Kathleen. And not that I'm a particular expert, I only am one of many people who have opinions. But yes, my bookshelves are absolutely crammed with poetry collections, and I probably wouldn't want to part with any of them. I may not come back to them again and again, but every collection is important in its own way. I'd like to start, though, with my initial brush with poetry, because I think that spark that ignites the desire in a young person to read further and to write is quite crucial, and it leaves a mark, I think. So my first contact with poetry really was Shakespeare. I started quite young. I was just bowled over by the imagery and character and narrative, and that stayed with me. Narrative is important. Dylan Thomas astonished me, the way he crashed words together. The Liverpool poets got me quite young, and that was the political content, and that has lasted. That's key to a lot of my reading today. Adrian Mitchell in particular, and John Lennon, his absolutely wild, wacky surrealism, and the visual elements, because his poetry collections, I think there were just two, were kind of peppered with drawings as well. And I'm very interested in the way the language of the visual overlaps and feeds into and talks to the written.
I wondered if you'd like to say a little bit about narrative and why that's important.
Well, I've always liked storytelling, and actually, if you go right back to the roots of poetry, it was narrative, a lot of it. You go back to Beowulf, for example. It's or the Icelandic tales. That's the root of poetry. It was an oral tradition. It was a means of storytelling, and yes, it was rich with imagery and paid attention to language and sound and rhythm, but it was essentially storytelling, and I think I grew up with that. So I've come up through from my childhood, and then when I was starting to write, I was looking at Adrian Rich, Audre Lorde, Tom Gunn, Sylvia Plath, and I think very much the poetry from a feminist and also a lesbian and gay perspective I was very interested in. But I liked poets who explored form, syllabics and rhyme, as well as looser forms. Poets I turn to frequently now, Gerard Manley Hopkins, who I kind of think of as like the Monteverdi of the poetry world. It's really hard to imagine that he was writing so long ago, because he just feels completely fresh. Every time I look at a Gerard Manley Hopkins poem, it feels as though it was written kind of yesterday. It is so immediate. And Monteverdi's music does the same thing for me. Seamus Heaney, I come back to again and again. Elizabeth Bishop, Wallace Stevens. I think things that I really like are the fact that they can nail things so precisely. They are absolutely accurate and not a word is wasted.
Elizabeth Bishop is a comparatively new discovery for me, and I must say, I sort of said, why has no one told me about her? You know, because she's such an amazing poet.
She is. I mean, that poem, The Fish, is so packed full of detail. You'd swear she was on that boat and she'd landed that fish, and that she knew everything there was to know about fishing and boats. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I totally believe it. There's such authenticity in her writing.
Keep going with the poets.
Okay. Well, the first person I'd like to talk about really is Kay Tempest, who I just love Kay's work, the sheer kind of incandescence of it. Kay Tempest has taken poetry, as I was saying earlier on, right back to its roots. Their poetry is a poetry of incantation. It's spellbinding. It has enormous precision and skill. Rhyme. It's poetry that twists and turns on itself. It absolutely leaves you gasping sometimes. So we've got poetry there, I think, that's been taken right back to its roots, but there is an authentic voice too. Something about Kay's work that I really respect is that political commitment. And this goes back to the Liverpool poets, Adrian Mitchell in particular, and the whole movement of poetry, and the war poets as well. Actually, I didn't mention First World War poets. David Morley is another poet I'd like to draw attention to. His recent collection, Fury, I think is brilliant. Again, fierce energy. I think I must be quite drawn to fierce energy. And his work is incantatory too. He is also a supreme storyteller. This Fury latest collection, it's rich with Roma history and Roma vocabulary. It's an enormously satisfying piece of work. Ilya Kaminsky,
Yes.
Deaf Republic. And I was rereading some of this last night, actually. Ilya Kaminsky says poems are like spells. They're not just about an event, they become an event themselves. A Deaf Republic for me, it works as a drama as well. Sometimes it feels like theatre. It almost feels Brechtian in its observations and its staging. It's staged. There are staged pieces. But other times it feels like a film. I love, again, the way Kaminsky uses the visual on the page. So he has sign language on the page too. And he reminds us, actually, that deaf culture is one of the youngest languages. It's one of the youngest languages in the world. So it's a very vibrant language. Lovely to see that on the page. We shouldn't just think of language as being the written. Some people think of it as just written. Some people think the written is in conflict with the oral, with the oral, the spoken. And it isn't. They're just part of the whole. You know, there are many languages that make the world, and a visual language is part of the world as well. Deaf Republic, for those who don't know it, it's a collection telling a story about a town whose citizens shut their ears after witnessing the death, the shooting, the murdering of a deaf boy by soldiers. The whole town shuts their ears, but they have to invent a new language to communicate with each other. so that the authorities don't know necessarily what they're talking about. So they do use sign language, but they also invent their own sign language. It's a fabulous collection. Raymond Antrobus, another deaf poet, and he writes very much about he writes coming from the experience of being part of the deaf community, but also he grew up in Hackney. He's mixed race. For some people, he wasn't black enough, and for some people, he was black and therefore racially abused. For some people, he wasn't man enough. So he examines many, many things. But I think central to the Perseverance is this lovely elegiac is the right word. He writes about the relationship between father and son, between him and his father. And it was not an easy relationship. His father could be quite neglectful and quite brutal sometimes and hard, but also absolutely tender as well. These are tender poems, beautiful poems. There's a poem in the Perseverance that I think is extraordinary, and it took me by storm. And I saw Antrobus read this out at Woodstock Poetry Festival. And it was after reading Deaf School by the Mississippi River. And he talks about Ted Hughes's poem, The Deaf School. I don't know if you know it. It's quite hard to find now. But what Antrobus has done is he's taken the text of Ted Hughes's Deaf School and he's put it in the collection, and he's blacked out every single line. So you can't read what the poem says. It's an act of anger. It's an act of taking control. And the poem then addresses what Ted Hughes was saying in Deaf School. And it's a poem about colonialization as well. It's a poem about many, many things. And I recommend reading that. Read Antrobus. Go back and read Ted Hughes's poem, and then go back and read Antrobus. And I maintain that actually Raymond Antrobus casts his net more widely and much more deeply than our ex-laureate did, certainly on this particular occasion. Fiona Benson is another writer I admire hugely. Vertigo and Ghost is an amazing collection. It's in two parts. The first part concerns Zeus and his catalogue of violent abuse. Benson imagines him behind bars, under surveillance, in hospital. When he speaks, it's in capitals, so he's shouting the text. And you're reading this and you can't help thinking Weinstein, Savile, the whole gamut of sadists. And the classics, I think, have always translated well into contemporary literature. They always will. There's a common currency. They address the human condition. And the second half of this collection, though, is really personal. It explores vulnerability. And the vulnerability of small things like bats and toads, rabbits, sparrows, ectopic pregnancy. I mean, extraordinary, luminous writing. So if there is violence in the second half, it's the violence of accident, perhaps. And I'd like to quote this, poems that deal with birth and its aftermath. The miracle of fetal cells that migrate across the placenta and bed down even in the mother's brain, stashed like stowaways or spies. She takes things right down to almost microscopic level. So there's, in the second part of the collection, there's our desire to protect, to procreate, our ability to love on a really deep level, our relationships with our children, and with the future as well. And of course, that harks back to Zeus. She doesn't mention Zeus necessarily again, but that threat of violence is always hanging over us. So it's a very beautifully poised collection, and I could go on. I could go on and on and on. Favourite poets here: J. Bernard, Joe Dunthorne, Claudia Rankin, Citizen, Kai Miller, Inua Ellams, the actual loads.
Yeah. So with Pat Winslow suggesting there are loads more poets we could be reading, let's go back to the poets that we think are worth hearing on this episode. The next poet you will hear is David Burridge with 2 poems.
Creaking. Above my head, wind seeps through the plaster cracks, slight shifting of beams and a century of angled draughts deliver a toneless tune, leaving me with a worry to ponder. When will a final crescendo dash the roof to the street below? Underneath my usual steps, a wobbled rhythm of floorboards tells me it is the season for wood to suck up moisture, expanding and shifting to scrape and rattle through the night, sometimes with a ghostly bang, theming my dreams. Once, such creaks configured shipping towards the unexplored, or marked the final steps up to the gallows. Measured noise that spoke through time, until iron and steel tore it down, then plastic form delivered a final silence. Steering my steps along a forest path, I catch the sound of Canopy Creek. Nature's perfect sway leaves me with the hope axes and saws are kept away. Coastal path. Stretches of sheer drops, then spaced out over grassy tops. A sign confidently points us towards peril. Still, others have skirted the high cliffs, and so must we. Granite leanings hide secret bays where village streets corner cringe. Plate tectonics honed perfect feet to spill white splashes all along. Gull sound aches the vicinity, some like child cries, others sear of assertion, all sounding off, heaven swarming to dive for the catch. A tight line horizoning, high blue and deep grey, draws my gaze, stirs me to march ahead, but doesn't shift boots. Both are mud implanted, and the search for safe stone holds sway. I look up again, and the sky has grimed. Warm, wet mist weakens my resolve. Skin-soak smothers me. But just as I bootstep my retreat, a cloud break, and a smile of sun urges me up for another go.
David's latest collection, Streetwise, has just been published by Cinnamon Press. Our next poet, Helen Overell, is from Mole Valley Poets, and she is giving us 2 poems.
Taking stock. In the last hour of sleep, mountain sheep cast aside all thoughts of safety, rushed down into the valley, sure-footed, wool-white backs jostling, eyes bright, stammered throats calling, ragged fragments of wisped bleats mingling, catching on heather, rising on birdsong. Every path leads to the river, from there to the gate, and here they wait, for they know that wakefulness startles, alters, thins bone to skim of air, undoes fleece, leaves only stardust, stuttered souls on a silent screen, fading to sprocket-fueled splashes of light. Sheepskin gloves. Before arthritis, forgetfulness, memory whittled to filigree, her mother would, if old gloves wore out, buy new ones and wear them in for her. Take on the as yet unyielding grip, ease fingers into the fleece embrace. knuckles held tight by the stiff stitched seams, finding blissful warmth. Each flex of thumb crinkled the palm, strengthened character, resilience, added fine lifelines. Until by Christmas Day the gift, wrapped, waited for her, ready to hold hands. Years on, the last pair of gloves, treasured all the more for holding those old days. Her two girls growing fast, almost tall, in the rushed fluster of the school play, one glove drops unseen into the night. Once home, dismay at the loss, distraught, every cupboard turned out, not a clue, then found next morning in the car park, foxmauled within an inch of its life, torn tufts of its former self scattered, the memory of her mother's hand in hers, still in one piece, shaken, free.
Our next poem is by Bridget Fraser. Bridget is a poet, writer of fiction and non-fiction, a filmmaker, and an ex-journalist.
The poem I'm going to read, The Visit, was the result of a short workshop which was about endings and epiphanies. Essentially, the workshop premise was that none of us will ever pass a doorway, cross a threshold, and be the same person on the other side. Here it is, The Visit. The last time I called in, I was so nervous. Welcome any time, you'd said, whenever you have time. But how was I to know how you, so volatile, would be today, what welcome I would get, or not? It took some courage, let me say, to press my finger on the bell, to wait outside while slippered feet came shuffling to the door. Too late now to turn away, to run, for I was there, and so were you, only your door between us. Then there you were, opening the door a crack, as always, checking who was there, then, seeing it was me, "It's you," you cried, and opened wide your door. I feared you'd never come, but here you are. Come in, come in. You opened wide your door. I opened wide my heart. And all was well, as it had ever been, and ever would be, us again.
Our next poet is Carl Tomlinson, who has become a stalwart of the Oxfordshire poetry scene, particularly in the past couple of years during the pandemic. He has recently published his first book, Changing Places, with Fairacre Press.
Samhain's Sacrifice. The knife cuts deep and clean to free the flesh from skin. I slice it into cubes, check the heat, add some spice, chuck out the seeds, and crack on with my recipe for soup. The pumpkins have done well this year. I do not choose to say if this is down to expert propagation or due propitiation, which I offered unaware. I do know this, that when we lifted them and barrowed wormy muck to spread on beds now laid to winter's rest, we were working side by side with all the ripening and fall that's gone before. Tonight, my sacrifice is slices of peel, tipped on the compost heap.
Anne MacDonald is an Irish poet, and she too has recently published her debut collection, Crow's Books, which is available on Amazon. Here she is with her poem, Molly Passing.
"I'll be a long time dead," I said, as I left the half-full, half-empty dishwasher gaping open in surprise. I went outside in the dying evening to plant out busy lizzies. Red and white, and not quite sure where to plant in their best interest, I opted for the front garden, so my neighbours could see them as they passed by. The next-door neighbour's dog, Molly, who is 14 years old, stops for me to pet her in the evenings. She sits, her coat rough in parts, whilst I pat her fur, avoiding the bald patch on the tumours. I take her paw every time as if it's the first time I have seen it, and she warrants a round of applause for being so clever. I wonder if she guesses this is not forever. Her owner stops and we discuss the planting of the new flowers. We both know the dog is dying. So we chat about the direction of the sun and where the shade is and share tips on how best to keep the plants alive. Molly sits quietly on the warm path, glad of the rest. At most, the busy Lizzies will last a season. I wonder if the real reason we ever plant anything is to communicate with each other at our metaphysical garden gates over light and shades and blots of colour. I'll be a long time dead, I said, as I passed the kitchen sink full of half-washed pots and pans in equal measure. Molly feels my hand on her silken head, a touch I never take for granted, a touch I treasure.
And now 3 poems from Bill Jenkinson. These come from a sequence which is work in progress, poems about islands. And if you go to the website, you'll see they are accompanied by photographs taken by the poet's grandfather in 1902 on a visit to Inishkay North and Inishglora, which are islands off the coast of County Mayo in Ireland.
Favourite. In his right hand a rope, ready to pull, in his left an oar, holding the water. He sits at his ease, in his curragh, balanced, ready, back straight, bantam-weight shoulders, no sweat on his face, his life made for boats. He frowns. The first days of spring are cold. Cut through his cardigan, the treacherous sunlight picks out a button. He has no gloves, no life-saving gear. How far can he swim? Better not think about peril, a sudden gust, a harsh wave. He makes a living night fishing, traps lobster and crab. His catch finds its way to the mainland. He serves his king in the islands. Stranger. You had done it before, from boy talent to flinty professional. For 10,000 hours you hit the spot 6 times out of 6. Day after day, back arched and side braced, you perfected your action, positioned your grip, thumb and 2 fingers, wrist cocked. You spun the ball until your analysis played in the press. You did it again with rifle and shotgun, eyes, hands and shoulders in firing position, stripping, reassembling, cleaning and oiling, setting up sights. You made yourself expert in fieldcraft and shooting. Then you were tall and rode trails in Tierra del Fuego. You knew beasts, fowl and game. You were determined on a name through action and words. Watching your hosts, the islander fishermen, what do you see? What do you think of their chances? Do they remind you of Welshmen who became Argentinian when they took brides? Such similar settings, level and raw, Patagonian pampas, the islands raked by wind and sea, where families live on whatever will fruit, on their fish, their cattle, trading with merchants from near and far, from islands of the Gaeltacht, off divided land. Assistant. His young, streamlined face breaks the skyline. He sits on a beach, acknowledging the shore's impermanence. He looks straight to camera, his camera, as the stranger takes the photograph with a seal in the foreground. Their torpedo shapes are stilled, their vestigial paws limp at their sides, their unclosable eyes tucked out of sight. Dribbling blood, the spring light and the head cushioned on driftwood. In his turn, back with his camera, he snaps his companion, the successful hunter, cradling his Mauser.
And now, David Radcliffe. He's a poet from the northwest of England, and his first collection, Through an Open Window, was published in 2021.
On my mind. Some may think me rude, think me thoughtless. But in fact, I think too much, leaving nothing more to say. Warriors invade my mind in longboats, riding chariots, on horseback, in armoured cars, on medication, weaving in and swooping out. You see, I keep you safe, protected from demons that threaten what my mouth may emit. I throw a blanket around you, save you from exposure to a fogged mind, where a multitude of voices echo around a tiny part of my size 7 head. Occasional thoughts excite, though hardly make the page for fear of failure. Conversation echoes. Philip Larkin salutes Dylan Thomas between sips of brandy. Thomas peers back over a flagon of ale, mockingly generous with underhand praise. My eyes close and more appear, legions of writers, performers, politicians and critics, none stepping aside, all of a muddle, and then you ask, are you listening to me? Thoughts plunge into darkness. I'm the unenviable proprietor of a house of overthinking, forgetting thoughts as they filter into loss. Once they leave, they seldom return, overtaken by a line from Ted Hughes or a verse to be woven. You are the treasure buried deep beneath all of this, my constant, enduring, undeniable obsession. But enough of this. Sorry, love. Did you say something?
Next, we have an extract from a reading by Lynne Wycherley in a Zoom open mic event in July. Lynne's most recent book is Brook Song and Shadows. Lynne is perhaps what we used to call a nature poet, and her poems are very much set in the natural landscape of her new home in Devon. But she's also an environmentalist and an eco-poet, as well as being concerned with the history of place, as reflected in some of her poems about Otterton, where she lives, and the First World War. The first poem you will hear, however, is about the moon.
As the moon wanes, the jade hare steps from her lantern, dances on the snow line beyond death. Loom waits in the swallow's loft, the smoky weft and cirrus rags of dreams. A wisp, a breath, she's hardly there, a silver hair of wisdom or a prayer. She fades, and I would follow, as if our souls could turn their sails, blend with the marvellous blue. It's a little bit of the music of brooks. The Otter is a local river. Water song, light on the run, undertones, grey mullet. Street brook to otter, otter to shore. Polyphonies pour, where all the dancing silvers meet as one. Brook lime, song beyond time. The water's nimble loop track, brisk with rain. The Milky Way, it's barely there, blue sketched over thatching spars. Before our glare can slur it, satellites blur it. Altissimo, its diamond spore taking our breath away. It's called Brook Song and Shadows. It's partly about the First World War period. And although you might be rather full, as it's over there, you might be rather full up with that because of a big centenary events in 2018. It's a very kind of Lynnish sort of ethereal treatment of war. So hopefully it's fairly fresh. That said, it's quite physical too. And I'm touched by the fact that men in this parish, and it would have been where you are too in Oxfordshire, in that period, young lads, they had these beautiful craft skills, making carriage wheels, making saddles, just so much, which we've lost. So I'm speaking to one of those lads just when he's kitted out for the First World War. Making, unmaking. Your hands could quake, your newly shod machine, rifle guard and bayonet frog, ammo nests by bones, hands that once shaped carriage wheels, axle to horizon, or conjured doors to gorse scent, sills to lanes. In it reads, guilty cups, butter rose, the Devon names of flowers. How you'd flow with the grain, spoke horse and cone, layers peeled from draw knives like skimmed cream, or work a hide with grooming brush, penny-weld, wild gleam. Saddlers, tile cutters, herders, all making, honing, tending, while on the front, the weft of life, sky-blown. This is called a stranded jellyfish, and it's an encounter I had with a jellyfish that had come in from the mouth of the sea and been washed up river. A stranded jellyfish. At the river's mouth, two worlds clash, saline and fresh. My footsteps dust, your sheen. You are muslin and lace, petticoat grace, pale queen. You whisper our planet is drying. You gasp for water as I gasp for air. If I wear my soul like a veil, will I look like you?
So that's it for episode 1. Tune in again next month for episode 2. And be sure to visit poetryworthhearing.biz to see the poems, find out more about the poets, and get information on how to submit. Thank you for listening.